In all my language learning, it was one of the most amazing transformations that I remember ever seeing. It was like my Japanese had kind of completely transformed. And that came from one thing. Hello and welcome back to the Story Learning Podcast. Hope you're having a great week. Fair warning before we start, there's a massive storm going on outside here. We've got things clattering around, we've got wind rustling through the trees at about 1 billion miles an hour. I don't know whether our light and our audio is going to manage to stay the duration, so we will see. But so far, so good. Now, today's question is all about bridging the gap between comprehension and speaking in a foreign language. So, for example, you can read a lot, you can listen and understand a lot, but when it comes to speaking, you can't speak. What's that all about? Why does it happen? How can we fix it? So let me read today's question. Ollie, I've been doing this reading and listening thing for a couple of years in Japanese, and it really works. In my case, what happened is that there is a huge gap between my writing and reading abilities versus my conversation abilities. And I do mean a huge gap, as in I can read the newspaper, but I can't confidently have a conversation, and I'm not sure how to bridge that gap. Thanks for the question. And first of all, great job for being able to read the newspaper in Japanese. That is no mean feat. I can tell that you must have spent a long time on your comprehension learning Chinese characters and so on and so forth. So good job. It's also completely understandable why you can't have a confident conversation in Japanese. So let's talk about it. The good news is that there is a very good reason for this, and I will work my way there. But let's start with some background that's going to help to understand why this happens and how we can fix it. So let's start by thinking about how we learn languages ourselves, our first language, our mother tongue. And when we are born, until we can actually speak with any degree of confidence, it's somewhere between 3 to 5 years, right? And during this time, what happens? Well, we are just immersed in the language. We have what's called comprehensible input. So we have our parents reading stories to us. We're surrounded by our friends, play groups and things like that. We spend years and years and years just comprehending, soaking things up. And the net result of that is that we can understand before we can speak. I was with my nephew, who's about 1 year old, 1 year old, he's about one. I was with him last week, and it was it just reminded me of this situation where he was desperate to talk, and he could understand. You could tell him to, do this or not do that, or high five, or what. He could understand all this stuff, but he couldn't speak yet. Now, obviously, part of this is down to developmental stages of a human being. They haven't developed that ability yet. But let's just plant a flag in this point that it's completely normal to understand but not be able to speak yet. Also, in the case of my nephew, he can understand. He obviously can't read yet. That comes later. And then, but until the point where you can actually listen and read and speak and write and do all of these things confidently with a real degree of competency. I mean, it's the best part of 10 years until you can do all of these things. And at any given point, your skills are developing at different points. Now, when it comes to learning a foreign language, for some reason, there's a tendency just to kind of jettison everything we know about how we learn our first language and say, no, we are smart, educated adults. We should be able to learn a language a lot faster. And so we start to look for all these shortcuts. But if we look around and we look for any evidence of adults being able to learn languages faster, such as the school system, for example, or language schools where people spend many, many years trying to learn languages, the success rate is abysmal. And so for me, our starting point is that, look, we all have a 100% success rate at learning one language. And so we should look to that for guidance about how a second language should be learned. So this is one of the reasons that at StoryLearning, we teach learning through reading, learning through stories, right? Because yes, that's also how we started learning as babies, but that's not the main point. The main point is that before you can speak, you have to know things. And it sounds really obvious, but you cannot speak or have a confident conversation in a foreign language until you know things. And there's two parts to this. First, you have to know enough to be able to say stuff, but you also have to be able to understand enough to be able to understand the reply when it comes back at you. And so there are two core skills here. One is speaking, one is listening. Underneath this is all this knowledge. You have to know words. You have to be able to decode grammar. You have to know phrases. You have to be able to pronounce words properly. You have to have an understanding of the social context, particularly in Japan, where half of the stuff actually goes unspoken in the first place, right? And so in order to be able to speak, there is a prerequisite, which is that we must develop our knowledge first. Now, often in the language learning world, you get people who kind of make a bit of a party trick out of going and learning to speak really quickly. So they say, oh, I learned a language in 2 weeks, or I learned a language in a month or something. And in reality, all they do is they memorize a bunch of phrases, go out and then use them, and everyone's like, wow, that's amazing. But then they don't understand what comes back, and they certainly couldn't pick up a book and read it. So it's a very kind of empty demonstration of language skills because it's only part of the equation. And so the pathway to, if we think about what it looks like to go from not speaking a language at all to being able to speak a language, step one is to learn a bunch of stuff. Learn a lot of stuff, actually. And this, for the questioner, is what you have been doing for the last couple of years. You now know a hell of a lot of stuff, and that's fantastic. Now, it's also possible that the stuff that you've learned is kind of written Japanese, and this happens a lot as well. If you spend your whole time reading novels or reading newspapers, that is actually a different kind of Japanese to what tends to be spoken. Right? So there is this side issue, but let's park that because it's not the core of the point. What we know for sure is that you know a hell of a lot of stuff in Japanese, which is great, but you haven't spent time actually activating it. You haven't spent time actually using it. And the core point that I always repeat time and time again about speaking in a foreign language is this. If you want to get good at speaking a foreign language, if you want to learn to speak a foreign language fluently, that is the result not only of knowing a lot of stuff, but of actually doing a lot of speaking. Right? It's not the case that you study and study and study, wait till you're ready, and then you suddenly emerge into the world completely fluent and fully formed. No. What you need to do is to go out and spend as much time practicing speaking as you did actually reading and listening in the first place. Speaking is a skill. Think about playing tennis. You could watch videos of the great tennis players and watch how to serve and learn the rules of the game and all of that. But until you've actually done 1,000 serves or 10,000 serves, you don't actually have any of the physiological understanding of what that actually involves. The feeling in your body, how to adjust for the wind, the look, the gaze of your opponent down the opposite end of the court. And speaking is just like this. You have to know the words, you have to be able to manipulate grammar, but you also have to be able to square off against another human, look at them in the eyes, understand when maybe they want to say something, so you have to pull back. You make mistakes and you have to recover. There's so much that goes into speaking. So the fundamental problem here is that you simply haven't spent enough time speaking. Now, I had this exact problem when I lived in Japan. This was back in 2010, 11 kind of time. I had also spent a couple of years studying Japanese. I've been taking classes, I've been going through my textbooks, I've been using my flashcards, all of these things. And I had exactly the same problem, that I would go and speak to someone. And there were two problems that I had. First of all, I couldn't get the words out properly. And second of all, my comprehension wasn't that strong. And so I would kind of panic whenever I got the response back. And you might be familiar with some of these, with this experience yourself. And there came a point, I remember I was in Tokyo, and I said to myself, look, this is no good. This doesn't make any sense at all. I am going to go hell for leather and do a classic Ollie thing of just be as stubborn as possible and just not rest until I've cracked this particular chestnut. And so I rationalized in my mind, look, the only thing I haven't done this whole time is a lot of speaking. So let's stop the studying altogether and now do nothing but speaking. And so I started arranging language exchanges. I didn't take classes because I'd done a bunch of those, and Japanese teachers, well, most language teachers, but especially in Japan, Japanese teachers are very rigid. There's not a lot of conversation that goes on. And so I said, right, let's stop with the study, let's stop with the lessons, I'm just going to go and speak. And so I arranged language exchanges as often as I could. I'd finish work and I'd go and do a language exchange. And we'd spend an hour speaking English, an hour speaking Japanese, and I did that for weeks on end. What I found was, incredibly quickly, after 2 or 3 weeks, I'd gone from being really quite anxious speaking Japanese, because I've just conditioned myself to expect it to all go wrong, to being very, very confident in speaking. And it wasn't because actually that I'd learned a bunch of new stuff, although I had. It's more that I had the confidence to navigate key features of a conversation, the way that actual conversations in Japanese tend to go, the way that they tend to, the phrases that people say, the way that people tend to work their way through a conversation in Japanese, which is quite unique. I also developed the confidence in that time to listen to the reply that comes back and to be able to not panic and process it, give it my best guess and carry on the conversation. I think, in all my language learning, it was one of the most amazing transformations that I remember ever seeing. going from being a bit of a shambles, really speaking, to being quite confident in the period of just 3 weeks. Now, after 3 or 4 months, it was like my Japanese had completely transformed, and it was an amazing experience. That came from one thing. Okay, I already had the knowledge in my head somewhere. All I needed to do was get so much practice that it just became normal to me, and then the confidence came, and then before you know it, then I was just speaking Japanese on a regular basis, and then that's when you're away. You're off to the races at that point. It's just like, you're at the moment you're reading the newspaper every day, so you get more and more confident at reading the newspaper. When you start to speak every day, you get more and more confident at speaking, and that's the way it goes. So it is completely normal that one skill follows the next, and it's not something to worry about. But you do have to contend with the fact that you're not going to get good at something without practicing it a lot. Now, of course, the one thing that we have today in 2025, as I'm recording this, that we didn't have back in 2010, 11, 12, when I was learning Japanese, was access to AI tools, right? So now I'm going to be clear. I absolutely think that you should put the time in to go and find people that you can speak with. And these are tutors that you could pay. These are language exchanges. But the other thing you could add into the mix is AI chat tools, so that you can actually practice getting words out. It's a hugely powerful thing in a situation like this where you're probably lacking confidence, you're not speaking as much as you could. Because if you just sat down and started using these AI tools for 30 minutes or an hour every day, you're going to start to develop this muscle memory in your mouth and getting these words out. You're going to start this process of actively recalling the words that you need and then use. So I would throw this into the mix. I would go and find as many people as possible that you can regularly practice speaking with. Make it a really big deal. Make it a priority. If you want to pay tutors for their time for speaking practice, you can do that as well. And you can also sign up to a tool like Langua or Teach AI, and you can start to practice on a regular basis as well. If you do these 3 things and you keep it up for a period of months, you won't believe how quickly you transform. So good luck with that. And I'm absolutely rooting for you, because I have that exact same experience myself. What you might find useful for this, with this kind of big new project inside your language learning, is my language goal planner. And what this helps you do is it helps you rate your progress in different areas, so you can actually see tangibly how much you're improving. It helps you set your own language learning goals. You've got a very clear one here, like a 3-month speaking goal. And then it helps you track your progress in sticking to those goals. It's called the Language Goal Planner. It's completely free. I'll put a link in the description for you to grab that. So anyway, thanks for listening to the podcast, and I'll see you back in the next episode.